Now we are moving on to the second session on assessment and management of post-COVID neuropsychiatric disorders by Dr. Dayal Narayanan, KTP. I'm happy to invite Dr. Somshekar Bijal and Dr. Sivashailam to chair the session. Dr. Somshekar Bijal, Associate Professor, HOD, Department of Psychiatry, GIMS Gadak, General Psychiatry, Indian Psychiatric Society, Karnataka Chapter, President, Psychiatrists Guild of North Karnataka. He is the Honorary General Secretary of IPS. He has served as a prison psychiatrist in Central Prison, Bangalore. He has won Best Medical Officer Award twice, awarded the Best Psychotherapist Award from NIMHANS. Dr. Sivashailam, Consultant Psychiatrist, practitioner for the last 15 years at Tuticorin. He is owning 25-bedded psychiatric nursing home, Rengasamy Nursing, a 24-hour hospital at Tuticorin. He got Dr. Sharada Menon Gold Medal by National Board of Examination in DNB Psychiatry final exam at 2006. His areas of interest are social psychiatry, community psychiatry. He is a coordinator, chief psychiatrist in a special Tamil Nadu government mental health project at Puliyampatti, a religious-based community psychiatric center at Tuticorin district. I welcome you to the dais, sir.
Sivasailam sir is the treasurer of Indian Psychiatry Society, Tamil Nadu chapter.
I invite Dr. Dayal Narayanan, KTB, to the dais. Sir, first.
Now, for the present topic, Dr. Dayal Narayan, KTP. He is the Associate Professor and Head of the Department of Psychiatry, Government Medical College, Manjeri, Kerala. He is also the Associate Editor, Kerala Journal of Psychiatry. He has given several talks at the national and zonal and state levels and has several publications also. He is the current in charge of the Suicide Prevention Clinic of the institution for more than 10 years. His areas of interest are geriatric psychiatry, community psychiatry, and psychopharmacology.
Good morning to one and all. In the last year, 2019, and the World Health Organization has declared COVID-19 as one of the ever worst pandemic which the mankind has experienced. So initially, the most of the time it was concerned with pulmonary related issues and physical factors which were causing a lot of issues. But over a period of time, we have come to know that many neuropsychiatric aspects, initially the only with respect to the illness per se, like anxiety, depression, where they used to become. But as the time progressed, we have come to know that many neuropsychiatric disorders, especially delirium, neuromuscular disorders, Guillain-Barré syndromes, then many other psychotic issues, then even catatonic cases have been reported. So the various pathophysiology has been reported, whether it's due to interleukins or cytokine storm which are contributing to the disease, and assessment of the such thing, especially in the last second wave, the mucormycosis was the one of the factor which was contributed significantly to the many neuropsychiatric complications of the COVID-19. So assessment and early interventions is very, very important to reduce the disability or the case burden which occurs as a result of this neuropsychiatric complications in COVID is very, very essential. Today we have with us Dr. Dayal Narayan, who will throw some light on this aspect. So over to Dr. Dayal Narayan, sir.
Very good morning to respected chairpersons, senior colleagues, both in the hall and also online, my dear friends. First of all, let me thank the organizing team of IPSACON 2021 profusely for having given me this opportunity and privilege to address this gathering. And I feel honored with this opportunity. And following the initial session by Dr. Suresh, who very clearly and expertly went through the intricacies of legal versus clinical aspects of telepsychiatry, I will be taking a slightly different approach. Because this is an evolving area. This topic is still evolving. The pandemic is still with us, and we are actually dealing with it in the different stages of its evolution. And nobody knows for certain answers to most of the questions that you or me may be having about the interactions of this pandemic or the COVID-19 infection with the neuropsychiatric manifestations a patient might be having. So the outline of my talk would be about the background and the magnitude of the issue and the neuropsychiatric aspects going through the different stages of the pandemic, issues pertinent to assessment, management, some insights into the pharmacological aspects of treatment and also non-pharmacological. So this context is very familiar to all of us. We have been having innumerable webinars, online classes, sessions and talks, and all these things have been going through, we have been going through these details, but we should remember that it's almost 2 years now since the first identified or declared case of that pandemic in Wuhan. And again in January 2020 we had the first case, that too incidentally in Kerala. And we have been having various landmarks in the last 1.5 years regarding availability of vaccines, India's vaccination drive, which has just crossed a huge landmark of 100 crores. And now, actually we are in a stage of opening up. From the stage of lockdown and restrictions, we are opening up and we are having an offline conference or a hybrid mode conference. And we are living with the entity called COVID. And this is a pictorial depiction of the most recent available spread of cases across the world, the density according to the reported number of cases across the world. We know that it's a global issue. It's no longer restricted to some areas, some countries or some people. And right from the initial stages of COVID, like when we have been anticipating a pandemic of COVID, there have been anxiety associated with its implications, its impact on our health, on different areas, including mental health. And subsequently, we had specific problems arising out of the pandemic, like the lockdown, the fear of community spread, and finally the spread has happened with its mortality component, that crisis with regard to requirement of emergency help, ventilator support, oxygen availability, all these things we have been through. And subsequently we had stages of relaxations in the restrictions, and we had newer waves of infection spreading across different parts of the country. We have an immunization drive, and we have COVID infected people, COVID survivors, and now we are thinking about the long-term perspective, the outcome of COVID, not from the perspective of positive versus negative, but from the perspective of recovery, well-being, functional status, long-term impact. So this is where actually the topic of neuropsychiatric manifestations and its underpinnings become very important. So is it unique to COVID, all this neuropsychiatric impact and long-term sequelae? Is it unique to COVID? Not at all. Because the research shows that similar impacts have been reported, well established for various different other conditions. Like, for example, Spanish influenza, we had a lot of studies. We had SARS spreads where we have research evidence showing that there are enough and more implications to mental health. Then other not so similar conditions, like for example, malaria, dengue, and other infectious disorders, they have been having a lot of interplay, overlap between the physical health versus the neuropsychiatric manifestations. And the focus has been on the neuroimmune and the neuroinflammatory pathologies, which are common to both these infectious or contagious conditions and many psychiatric disorders. We know that there is a neuroinflammatory and neuroimmunology to most of the psychiatric disorders, at least in a good proportion of patients have that particular pathology underlying their symptomatic manifestation in psychiatry. And then there are treatment emergent issues, like for example, the medications, the agents, the experimental molecules or even empirically tried molecules to treat these health situations like immunomodulators or antimalarials or steroids. What the impact of those molecules on the mental health of the persons receiving this. So that is the background. Now, the psychiatric morbidity in connection to a pandemic like COVID can be of different varieties. It could be with regard to a pre-existing illness which has a relapse or recurrence or worsening of symptom in the context of a pandemic now. It could be a new onset of psychiatric illness which can be triggered by sudden and drastic changes associated to a pandemic like this. It could be during an active COVID infection and its treatment during recovery, or it could be somewhat short-term or long-term post-COVID, after recovery, what happens over a period of time. So we are actually gradually shifting to the last part of that 4 points, where we are now getting a lot of patients who have already recovered from an active COVID infection of varying intensities and severities, and we are looking into the potential impact on their mental health. And the patient population whom we will be assessing and managing would be actively COVID positive patients or recovered COVID patients. We are dealing with a lot of healthcare workers and doctors who have been COVID positive. Their mental health and the impact on their functionality is another important aspect. And we are also dealing with caregivers of patients, and they may not have an active infection or a past infection, but still they may be having unique and specific issues pertaining to this condition. So personally speaking, from my perspective, it has got some personal experience with regard to this particular area, because the institution where I work has been an active COVID treatment facility for a prolonged period, more than 1 year, catering to the maximum population of the state, that is the state of Kerala. The most populous state district is Malappuram, and this particular medical college has worked as the nodal COVID treatment care center for that particular district. And we have been leading the statistics for almost 1 year with regard to the daily number of cases, serious cases, ventilator usage and all those things. So it's been a very hectic and very strenuous 1 year, to say, not only as a psychiatrist but also a healthcare provider, with limited infrastructure and manpower, and with exclusion of the non-COVID facilities initially. We had to actually cater to such a huge number of COVID patients that we had to exclude non-COVID treatment except emergencies and casualties. And we had to shift our psychiatry OPD facilities to an external building, so that the patients are not coming in direct contact with the risk of infection. But we continued with casualty services, telemedicine services, and we also had services for prisoners with COVID or suspected COVID. And we had only inpatients who were severely ill, or medical legal patients, or COVID positive patients. So this was a scenario. Along with that, we are continuing with the medical education of 110 MBBS students, but we had no PG courses. Internship had to continue. All classes shifted to online format, and gradually we have been resuming the offline classes and posting. So this is how the impact on a training center can be for more than a year. And the kind of problems that we dealt with right from the beginning, we anticipated a lot of problems, mostly in the domain of anxiety, depression, or adjustment problems. But since most of the hospitalized patients were severely ill, because we had no place to admit simply positive patients without any severity of illness, we admitted only those who required oxygenation or ventilation, or those who had significant comorbidities or were in high risk age group. Lot of patients having severe pneumonia, ARDS, cytokine storms, on a lot of medications, antivirals, because every day the guidelines were changing and new molecules were being tried, something new was being postulated to be effective. So in effect, patients were getting some 10-20 medications of different doses for different duration. On top of that, steroids and immunomodulators. Most of them had comorbidities, and many of them were utilizing life support systems and intensive care units. And the predominant kind of problems that we dealt with were belonging to the categories as expected: delirium, neurocognitive symptoms, because we cater to a lot of elderly patients having other coexistent neurocognitive issues. And catatonia was an important presenting manifestation in many patients. Some of them were stuporous, apathetic, and having specific or obvious anxiety or depressive symptoms. Agitation, restlessness, and aggression was an important presenting feature which required psychiatric consultation. And we also had many patients who manifested with suicidal behavior while in hospital, while in intensive care units, while waiting for discharge. We did have patients who attempted or expressed their intention to attempt suicide. And this kind of an issue, see, we know that even in a routinely functioning general hospital where an ICU setting is available, where patients are admitted, the psychiatric consultation and management of an active behavioral problem in ICU requires a lot of visits, consultations, serial assessment, all those things on a timely basis to manage a patient optimally. And when you have a hospital full of fully converted into ICUs, having around 300 or 400 beds, almost all of them declared as ICU and on oxygenation, on oxygen support, on ventilator, and we are getting calls from different places regarding behavioral abnormalities, managing aggression, irritability, apathy, stupor, catatonia. It's going to be a very, very huge task. And that if consultation is sent for. What if a person in the managing the ICU is unable to send for consultations? They are primarily focusing on oxygenation status, the saturation levels, indices of inflammatory markers, and they don't even get time to think about a psychiatric consultation for behavioral problems. And that has been happening throughout the hospital, and without any additional staff and absence of, that's another important issue that we had in COVID. A COVID positive patient cannot have a bystander who is a COVID negative family member. Usually whenever we admit a patient with some behavioral problems, we get additional support, manpower from the family members who can take care of the patient's daily needs, feeding, medications, self-care. That is not possible here. And that again, an assessment also that creates a lot of problems. A patient who is anxious, apprehensive, agitated, you don't get enough information from that patient regarding his past history, family history, whatever. That is also limited. And during this period, we are having actual shortage of healthcare workers due to a cluster of infection among the healthcare workers in the hospital, and you have to deal with limited number of staff. So the assessment in the hospital has been seriously limited with the obvious restrictions posed by the PPE that we all wear, and the patient is having a mask or a connected ventilator connected, and facial expressions, eye contact can be very difficult to assess. The privacy issue, a very busy intensive care unit where in the next bed someone is dying or someone is being given CPR, and you are talking to someone who is in the next bed about his problems. So obviously we know how much of privacy and how much of comfort level we can provide. And always in an ICU, in a COVID setup, the priority is always given to the medical parameters. The people are always looking on the oxygen saturation levels, the markers of inflammation in the blood, coagulopathy, infections, blood sugar, and they get least priority assigned to the behavioral symptoms and its management. And lack of training and expertise in assessment. One huge problem that we faced in this particular stage was, being a hospital, medical college, we depend a lot on the interns who actually are getting trained in assessment and treatment of patients, and they are the first line caregivers. But in this particular batch of interns, they actually got their final year of MBBS training during the COVID period. So they are practically having no real clinical exposure in dealing with patients, assessing them, interacting with them, leave alone psychiatry. General medical assessment and treatment, they are very, very, very poorly trained. And they come into internship straight away. They are posted in ICUs, optimizing ventilatory care and dealing with all sorts of antivirals coming every day. And that's a very, very tough time to convince them regarding that there are issues related to mental health that patients may be having, and these can be managed, treated, and the patient can recover better if we deal with that. So that was always there. So we have a patient who is restless, uncooperative or agitated, having sleep derangement, which people are always very worried about dealing with, because they think that you treat with the benzodiazepine, the patient's respiratory depression will happen. Already the patient is on ventilator support. So all sorts of confusions, and crying, non-communicative patients, worried about other family members. And there are many patients whose only manifestation was their eagerness to go back home from the ICU, from the hospital. When can I get discharged and go? And many of them practically were seeing patients in the neighboring beds put on ventilators, dying in the next 1 or 2 days, because ventilators were available only for that last resort measure. And once you intubate a patient and ventilate, it is sure that it's almost your death certificate. So a neighboring patient who is witnessing this particular phenomena is praying that please don't ventilate me. So even if that person might benefit from ventilatory support and intubation, that person is hesitant. It becomes highly agitated and aggressive when this particular option is suggested, or the relatives don't take up. So this is the kind of issue that we had faced over the last 1 year there. And it's very difficult to provide direct consultations to patients lying in different floors and different wards, which has been converted to ICU by a person physically walking along with all this PPE and entering the hospital and talking to the patients physically. And the alternative that we had a discussion about telemedicine and telepsychiatry, the alternative that we could have utilized was electronic means of communication, like using devices online. But the problem is it's very difficult to create connectivity and network facilities in a hospital which is already created for some other purpose. And we had a lot of, even within the limitations, we could actually kind of think about such options, so that the psychiatrist who is on duty can directly interact with the patient without physically going there and then providing expert advice and care, because the number of patients being so high. And a lot of them having multiple comorbidities, including diabetes, cardiovascular, renal dysfunction, requiring dialysis, surgical issues, where then we potentially probably had maximum number of cases of invasive fungal infections like mucormycosis, who had multiple stages of surgical management for recovery from the life-threatening invasive fungal infections. And we had a lot of patients who had coexisting alcohol withdrawal delirium as a comorbidity while in hospital for treatment for. So these are all not a uniform way of presentation of psychiatric disorders. Depending upon the patient's background and context, these things varied. And the duration of hospital stay. In many patients who had neurobehavioral problems, had a prolonged hospital stay, and the post-operative recovery was prolonged or delayed, and they had insufficient response to some of the treatments. Most importantly, I would say patients with invasive fungal infections. Quality of life was significantly affected, and time to functional recovery post-discharge is yet to be seen, because we are seeing them in follow-up after recovery. And this is about the ongoing problems. And what about the new onset patients, like new onset of psychiatric symptoms in a patient who otherwise had no history of psychiatric disorders? Following COVID infection, we detect some pathologies. Most of the patients who had symptoms suggestive of panic attacks in our experience, and many patients had brief depressive reaction, depressive episode, or adjustment disorder, brief depressive reaction. And most of the patients were severely asthenic, having lethargy and lack of drive. And this has been very clearly established in a cohort of healthcare workers infected while in hospital. And we had seen the delay that they had in recovering from the symptoms and getting back to duty. And they were severely dysfunctional for many weeks following recovery. And we had a few cases related to medication issues, like patients while on lithium developing COVID positivity, while in hospital they continued lithium. The patient knows that I cannot stop lithium because I always get a relapse when I stop lithium. And we had a patient with lithium toxicity which could be identified in time and treated well. We had patients with NMS-like symptoms. We had patients presenting with hypoglycemic encephalopathy while on treatment. And all these symptoms initially were referred for psychiatric consultation. Subsequently, while on evaluation, we could find out the associated pathologies in them. And patients on hydroxychloroquine or steroids on significant doses had manifestations with irritability, aggression, and psychotic symptoms. Not typical of a psychotic disorder, but symptoms of fleeting nature and varying intensity and fluctuating course. And we had patients who expressed suicidal thoughts gestures, and attempted suicide while in hospital who could be rescued. Fortunately, in the last 1.5 years, we didn't have ever a single case of serious suicidal attempt or death in hospital. Another big proportion of cases that we catered to were the antenatal and puerperal cases, like where patients who were pregnant, who had, nearing the term for, date for delivery. This was the only hospital catering to the delivery, gynecological and obstetric services in the district, who was catering to COVID positive patients. And we had there are days when we had 12 to 20 deliveries of COVID positive mothers every day during that peak of the time. And fortunately, what we could find out was that the patients who had serious behavioral problems during delivery, that was closely related to or directly linked to the severity of the COVID infection, the desaturation with regard to oxygenation and respiratory failure. And none of them required prolonged treatment in the immediate postpartum period. They recovered. But many behavioral issues which were not directly identified during the period of delivery, they were subsequently discharged, and we actually went through in the follow-up. We actually called them directly for follow-up, giving specific dates, and had a psychiatric evaluation of those patients. Surprisingly, we could identify at least 3 patients who were severely suicidally depressed in the postpartum period, at the 3 months postpartum period, whose symptoms had onset while in the hospital for delivery, but no one noticed these symptoms while they were in hospital. So only because a follow-up was planned where psychiatric screening was mandated, this could be picked up. So that's not a very uncommon issue. It's very common. And post-discharge follow-up, many could be identified and treated for depression and adjustment disorder. And geriatric patients, due to the admission procedures, we will have a significant proportion of patients above 60 admitted in hospital because of comorbidities and their age factor. And there is a significant interplay between the neurocognitive and behavioral symptoms in these patients, and that impacts their assessment, recovery, and functional improvement. And sleep derangement is a very common problem which we find it very challenging to manage even in patients in whom a diagnosis of specific disorder is made. And children and adolescents, fortunately, we didn't have much problems in the initial phase, but unfortunately, we are gradually seeing an increase in trend of increasing number of children being admitted with some significant problems of COVID, and we can expect some behavioral issues also specific in them in this population. But till then, it was mostly in the, they were remaining in the community, and many may not have been monitored for or assessed for their morbidity. But definitely, during lockdown, online sessions, we had a lot of issues arising out of adolescents' behavioral problems in the academic and behavioral field. And the long-term course is another important issue that we are not very clear about even now. Onset and progression of mild to moderate symptoms may go unnoticed because the priority is given to the recovery from the physical symptoms. Significant decline in quality of life could be an important aspect, especially those who are functioning, employed, undergoing education. This dysfunction can have an impact on their contribution to their role. And choice of medications is another issue, which like whether we need to modify the choice of psychotropic medications depending upon the status of the patient, whether he had a COVID in the past or they're having an active infection. Access to services and non-pharmacological intervention in long term is another issue that we need to look into. So instead of focusing on what type of symptoms patients manifest, what type of psychiatric disorders follow COVID infection, I think it is pertinent to look at the how and why of neuropsychiatric manifestations. Why patients manifest with neuropsychiatric symptoms? There are definitely various pathophysiologies that we are aware of. We don't clearly know how much each of these contribute. The direct, because we know that it's a neurotropic virus, there can be a direct virus infection of the neurons. Then immune and inflammatory pathways have been well described in literature till date. Then there could be pharmacodynamic and pharmacokinetic interactions of medications used for treating COVID and treating psychiatric disorders, and comorbid biochemical changes accompanying this. And impact of psychosocial issues are significant, as we see the way in the patient, the socio-occupational and economic factors influence the health, including mental health. So this is just a pictorial description of how and where this impact can take place, starting from right from the entry of the the virus into the endothelial cells, subsequent to neuroinflammation releasing cytokines, and then production of the kynurenine and the increased quinolinic acid, increased glutamate, upregulation of NMDA receptors, and then depletion of the so that leads to certain neurotransmitter function getting depleted, and its effect on different brain areas could be different. And there is another cascade proceeding from the neuroinflammation to the coagulopathies to its subsequent changes. So it's all postulated. We know these mechanisms, but we don't really know in a given individual how much each of this pathway contributes to the symptoms. But there is an application aspect to this knowledge, because understanding the cellular and molecular aspects of COVID brain damage could guide our interventions to reduce the long-term neuropsychiatric symptoms. Because if you know the neuropathology, it can be a model for neurodegenerative processes related to neuroinflammation. Most of the psychiatric disorders and neurocognitive disorders have a neuroinflammatory base. So that can be an option. So COVID can give us an option to study these models and then identify newer strategies, and understanding the factors that determine specific neuronal vulnerability in given individuals. Why a certain group of patients become more affected with the neuropsychiatric manifestations compared to another group. And the efficacy of anti-inflammatory treatment in neuroinflammation. Because anti-inflammatory agents have been tried and tested in psychiatric disorders in many patients. Similarly, we have a role in COVID. So what about the overlap? What about the similarities of anti-inflammatory treatment in neuroinflammation? So the assessment has to be periodic whenever possible, because as I suggested in the initial part of the presentation, the different stages of disorder will manifest with different types of abnormalities, and so whenever possible it has to be serialized while in hospital. Post discharge also we can have serialized, and monitoring and judicious modification of the co-prescribed medications may reduce interactions in many of these patients. So instead of waiting for excluding all possible other diagnoses before diagnosing a psychiatric disorder, it is always better to diagnose proactively. If there are enough symptoms and manifestations, diagnose a psychiatric disorder and start treatment. And there are studies about biomarkers available for identifying and monitoring patients who are at risk of neuropsychiatric complications. This is in the preliminary stage only. The references are there in the presentation. Not yet sufficiently established to warrant bedside utility, but this could be an area where we can actually look for. And integrating the psychiatric screening in all even COVID hospitals and post-COVID clinics will help us in identifying serious patients who require immediate care or long-term care, and outreach services can be strengthened so that patients do not need to have difficulty in accessing consultations and medicines. That is where telepsychiatric component can have an important role to play. Only thing is the initial assessment need to be done by a mental health professional. That can be actually done by combining the services with the district mental health programs, where a psychiatrist will be available to evaluate, and an expert can suggest regarding the different modalities of management, and subsequent follow-up can be done by the DMHP clinics. And we shouldn't forget to simplify the regimens of medication so that the interactions can be limited. And sleep hygiene is a very important. Many patients simply develop problems because triggered by the sleep derangement during hospitalization or post-recovery period. Address all types of substance use problems parallelly, because that could be another contributing factor in most of these patients. COVID alone will not be the single factor. And this could be an opportunity to reduce stigma, as Dr. Saha was describing in the initial session also. Whenever possible, we can actually highlight that this is an area which is genuine. Neuropsychiatric manifestations of COVID indicate that all the psychiatric disorders are of brain origin. So we don't need to stigmatize and isolate people based on the diagnosis. We have to treat them whenever possible in combination with other issues. So there are no clear evidence in the existing other than the existing guidelines to choose psychiatric medications. There are a lot of hypotheses regarding the pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory properties of molecules, but they are not enough to warrant any particular suggestions or choice of medications as of now. So when in doubt, start with a molecule which one is most familiar with and one is most effective for the given diagnosis. And most commonly, there are multiple medications the individual is taking, so there will be interactions. and some indicators like the pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory properties of the molecules. This is just to tell you that a lot of research is already taking place in psychiatry with regard to the properties of our medications, and I'm not going to the details. And as I told you, there is no specific evidence available for the choice of agent or duration, but always keep in mind the possibility of interaction with steroids, anti-inflammatory drugs, anticoagulants, immunomodulators. Telemedicine services, including a Sanjeevani platform, as described in the previous session, can have an increased reach and accessibility, but at the cost of direct evaluation, which is limited, which might be required in most of these patients with comorbidities. And non-pharmacological intervention, I will just mention that we need to scale up the online options for this kind of interventions also, so that we can even include group sessions where patients can be assembled in a follow-up peripheral center, and an expert can provide non-pharmacological interventions. And healthcare workers issues, I am not having time to get into the details of this, but this is a very important issue. And as a psychiatrist working in a medical college, I am actually parallelly treating at least 10 or 20 healthcare workers at a time of the same hospital for their mental health issues. So this is not a simple thing. We need to be aware of this, and we need to act in that. So is there a unique post-COVID psychiatric disorder as such? My answer would be no. It is not unique to COVID. It is common to any other neuroimmune, neuroinflammatory condition that can have manifestations in multiple domains. But this knowledge about this interaction and the interplay can lead us to research on neuroimmune pathogenesis of psychiatric disorders and interventions. So this is one recent study which has indicated a bidirectional relationship. Not only that COVID leads to psychiatric symptoms post-COVID, but also that psychiatric patients had a more chance of developing COVID. So previous psychiatric status had an impact on your risk of developing COVID. So there is a bidirectional relationship. Probably this study has a very interesting design. So maybe that is one thing that actually we can look forward to. And I've put the references, important references in the slides, and I will leave the slides here for anyone who is interested to look into. Thank you very much for a patient listening.
Thank you, Doctor. Sir has covered extensively with before the start, with the anticipation of having COVID, then ending up with the survivors, and also issues related to the healthcare workers and possible pathophysiology for the causation of this neuropsychiatric complications. And especially he has given first-hand experience based on his working in a government medical college. Most of the medical college hospital which have general hospital psychiatry units have this way of management of the COVID-19 patients in the last 2 years. So with this, now I would like to ask any questions are there. Please, sir.
Can I have? Thank you, Dr. Dayal. In my clinical practice, I have come across a lot of new onset, particularly in the middle age group, females, coming to me with a lot of anxiety, panic. If you see the infection per se, it is very mild category, but usually they used to read a lot of newspapers. Here in Tamil Nadu, if you see in the first COVID, that is in the wave, post-COVID wave, a lot of suicides happened. So these females, they got triggered by this, by reading these medias, and they came with a lot of anxiety, OC symptoms and depression, etc. So it's not, I think it's not a biological purely, it's not related to neuroinflammatory or biological. It can be a social or some other things. So could you please comment on this?
Even there, I would say the biology is there, because how these people are predisposed to this kind of behavior. Like first, following closely the whatever news and details that come up in newspapers and magazines, and social media has been a very important issue during these days. A lot of news being circulated, many of them having no scientific basis regarding treatment, efficacy of some food items or some preventive methods, all those things. So it's very clear that patients who get influenced significantly by this kind of an input belong to a particular set. They have a personality set trait which makes them vulnerable to that kind of an issue. So they may be at the risk of developing the symptoms in another context where situation is different, not only in COVID. So that is there, but I would say that it is not directly linked to the infection per se. It is related to the context in which the infection is spreading and the limitation that it has on the psychosocial aspects of the individual. Definitely that is there. But treatment wise, we would proceed in the same way as treating a person with similar problems, like a person reading all those health magazines and suspecting all sorts of symptoms, illness in them, and then asking you for solutions like, am I having this problem? Can I get investigated? Is it okay to have this? So I think that aspect is similar, but as you said, it's not directly linked to the infection per se. Thank you.
Yeah, you can ask.
Good presentation, sir. But I'd like to go a shade away from your presentation. I have gone through COVID myself, me and my mother. What happened with me was, we ourselves also, me as a psychiatrist also, tried to pigeonhole myself into a disorder. I think that was a mistake which I did, which unfortunately I thought this talk also is leading us into some categorization of behavioral changes which occur. Few things which occurred with me was something which was that uncertainty through the day, worsening in the evening. Tremendous amount of sleep, don't know what to do. No correlation between what the radiology or the immunology gives with my condition. Got admitted because the CT scan score was very high. Then they said, we are about to discharge you, but that time my condition became worse. What I am trying to stress on this is, we are trying to pigeonhole patients as per our understanding. I think we need to look into these patients even symptom-wise also. One of the things which has been occurring with me for almost 2-3 months was lethargy, uncertainty. And I think those are the symptoms which we could not put into any diagnosis of anxiety or depression like that. So I think we need to move away from one particular thing. On this particular thing, do you think something more has been done?
Very valid point, sir. Like, in fact, that brings us to the primary question of whether the psychiatric disorders labels that we today apply are valid as such. It's true that none of these are absolute entities. They are just simply labeling them according to some symptom constellations. So that applies more to a newer entity like this, because nobody has gone through this in the past, this kind of symptoms, the experiences, and all these things need to come out through the experiences, through further evaluations, because we will not see unless we are tuned to look for those things. If you don't ask a patient about how you thought, what were your thoughts like, what were your feelings like, you simply stop by evaluating whatever is externally manifest. So that is a very important aspect. As of now, I am yet to come across any published literature which tells us about the experiential aspects and the unique emotional changes that can be attributed to being infected with COVID. I don't know whether we will come across that, because we need some different type of methodologies for getting a good insight into that. Quantitative methods of assessment may not be the sufficient option. Maybe we have to look into mixed methods or qualitative methods to assess about this aspect of symptomatology, as you have said. As of now, no published literature I have come across.
As previously it was spoken, we also saw 600 patients just during the COVID, active COVID infections, but diagnosable disorder was very rare. Okay, they had some anxiety symptoms, depressive symptoms, some sort of panic attacks, but not amounting. But did you encounter any patients with acute psychosis? Because we had some nearly 7 to 8 patients, but we do not know whether it could be correlated with COVID. Could be even when there had not been COVID, they would have had it. One thing. And second thing, post-vaccination, we have 2 patients. They didn't have any COVID infection. Post-vaccination, 2 patients had developed psychosis. That could be a neuropsychiatric correlation. We have yet to find out. We have done the MRI, but I don't think we found out anything that was new or something like that. Anything you have encountered such a way?
We are yet to come across, very good observation, but we haven't come across post-vaccination.
We are trying to publish it actually.
Okay.
So that's what. But I don't think any neuroinflammatory markers or anything we couldn't find, but any in your experience.
And one possibility is that the neuroinflammatory changes could be just a trigger. Subsequently, what goes on, you may not get the initial triggers there. Like, it can go on in the person's system. So that is one possibility. Another is one area where diagnosable psychiatric disorders I could identify very clearly and treat was in the postpartum group, as I said. Because we had, just by following up those with severe COVID while they were admitted for delivery, subsequently in postpartum period, we were actually shocked to see that initially all the 5 patients we interviewed on the day 1 of that evaluation, 3 of them had severe depression. They were simply crying. They cannot stop crying. They had sleep disturbances, energy
impacts
changes.
the child also.
And
so
yeah, and then subsequently they recovered and they are attending follow-up now. So that is where I can actually say that clear diagnosable disorder was there. All others are, as you said, some symptoms, some cluster of symptoms which at best we can put into this group. But we don't need to put into that group, as sir said. We can actually treat them, look at the symptoms, the functional disturbances that they have, and then try to.
most prominent was only insomnia, the sleep disturbance. That's what we found. Thank you.
I go with madam. Actually, in fact, we had around 5 to 6 cases. I made a case report also, but it's not yet published. One with psychosis, especially acute polymorphic picture. That was one. And catatonia, we had 2 patients. And apart from anxiety, depression, and PTSD, those things were there. So definitely the CRP levels are quite raised in case of with patient with NMS, so catatonia and acute polymorphic picture, compared to anxiety and depression patients, what I experienced. Madam, please. Kindly introduce yourself, madam. And then.
I'm Dr. Sunita, working in Sri Ramya Hospital, Trichy. So I may be deviating little, but I just want to know, since because of COVID, many people have lost their lives. So was there any provision in your hospital to address their relatives and caregivers?
Definitely, that is another area, that survivors of COVID or survivors of COVID deaths. Both are important. But the problem is, right now we are limited with resources to deal with the COVID positive patients and their follow-up. So it's outreach to people who may not come to us, because these survivors may not seek help directly unless they are prompted or they are given some access. So that is an area where I think we have to do some work, a general work as such, because this is important in quality of life, maintaining their health well-being.
Thank you.
Dr. Sharif, Kerala, Kochi.
Last question.
I'm just asking a psychosocial legal question, not it may be related to this. See, there is post-COVID suicide. How do we go for a diagnosis? It could be either with a prehistory of psychiatric illness or with no previous psychiatric illness, has had COVID, commit suicide. What happened was we could not get any kind of help from the government, like any kind of, it would be considered death due to suicide. So they did not get any, because according to the WHO, it does not come under that. So what can we do about it on that aspect? It's not related to this one. I'm just asking because the government said, fortunately you did not have answer. So you can answer it, sir. Please.
Dayal sir?
Fortunately, you didn't have any suicide cases, but I did have 1 or 2 of them. And I tried for the compensation. They told absolutely WHO guidelines does not permit psychiatric or psychiatric illness with comorbid COVID as a criteria for compensation. So I think the society has to.
Because that's an important issue, because psychiatric disorders, as we had in the past problems with including psychiatric disorders in medical insurance, similarly, and we still have problems with suicide as for insurance. Even other general insurance also, the suicide is exempted for claim. So this is a technical issue actually, because we know that this could be a real issue. The person had significant problems and has committed suicide in that context, but we don't have anything to prove it. That is the issue, and how to prove it sufficient enough for the authorities to accept it as a criteria for compensation, I am not sure.
Honorable Supreme Court has recently passed a judgment stating that if any COVID deaths are there, even post-COVID complications, they defined a stipulated period. In that case, suicide, for example, in Karnataka, even we are giving a compensation for around 1 lakh rupees from the government of Karnataka, even though if it is suicide also. But only thing you need the treating physician has to prove that that has happened within the stipulated period, what defined by the Supreme Court. The committee has been formed on the directions of the Supreme Court. So,
I think we can close the session. May I request Dr. Abhay for his best question for this session. Sir, please come to the dais for sharing your personal experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was a thought-provoking session. Now I invite the chairperson to deliver the memento to Dr. Dayal Narayanan. I invite Dr. Baheshri to honor the chairpersons.